All right, Exodus chapter 25. We're going to start in verse 23. I'm going to read it for you, and y'all can follow along. Verse 23, you shall make a table of acacia wood. 2 cubits shall be its length, a cubit its breadth, and a cubit and a half its height. You shall overlay it with pure gold and make a molding of gold around it. And you shall make a rim around the handbreadth wide, and a molding of gold around the rim. And you shall make for it 4 rings of gold, and fasten the rings and the 4 corners at its 4 legs. Close to the frame the rings shall lie, as the holders of the poles to carry the table. You shall make the poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with plates, and dishes, and incense, and its flagons and its bowls, to which you shall pour drink offerings, and you shall make them of pure gold. Underline verse 30, and you shall set the bread of the presence on the table before me regularly. You shall make me a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of hammered work. Its base, its stems, its cups, its calyxes, and its flower shall be of one piece with it. And there shall be 6 branches going out of its sides. 3 branches of the lampstand out of one side of it, and 3 branches out of the lampstand on the other side of it. 3 cups shall be made like almond blossoms, each with a calyx and a flower on one branch, and 3 cups made like almond blossoms, each with calyx and flower, and on the other branch for 6 branches going out of the lampstand. And on the lampstand itself there shall be 4 cups made like almond blossoms, with their calyxes and flowers, and a calyx of one piece, and with it under a pair of 6 branches going out from the lampstand. Their calyxes and their branches should be of one piece with it, the whole single piece of it hammered work of pure gold. You shall make 7 lamps for it, and the lamp shall be set up as to give light to the space in front of it. Underline that, and the lamp shall be set to give light to the space in front of it. Its tongs and its tray shall be of pure gold. It shall be made with all the utensils out of a talent of pure gold, and there you shall make them a pattern of which there is being shown you on the mountain. I know that's a lot of phrases and a lot of calyxes, and most of you may not know what a calyx is. I think of a calyx as what's on my hand. But there's a lot of stuff going on here, and we're going to kind of break it down, and there's a beautiful, beautiful picture of Jesus Christ through the tabernacle that God is explaining for Moses how to build right here. But as we kind of go through here, you have to understand a little bit about what's going on before to be able to understand the tabernacle and what's going on here. Before this, if you remember from Moses and your little children's Bible stories, or maybe you've been teaching in children's church here recently, and maybe you remember this, Moses and the nation of Israel was in Egypt, and they were enslaved there in Egypt. And God allowed them to come out of slavery in Egypt. They crossed across the Red Sea, God parted the sea, and somehow the Israelites crossed the Red Sea on dry land. I can't even begin to fathom that you crossed a sea, a lake. Picture walking across Lake Eufaula, and you've walked on dry ground. And God ordained and had the power to walk across dry land. And as soon as the Egyptians come and they start pursuing them, they get stuck in wet ground, and their chariots and their horses can't proceed any further. How did the ground get wet? The sea still parted. All these things going on. It's a beautiful picture. And God led them on a 40-year journey, the Israelites, on a 40-year journey to the Promised Land. They spent time in Canaan. They spent time on the mountainsides. They spent time everywhere else except for the Promised Land that God had promised them. That God had originally promised Abraham hundreds of years before this. Several generations before Moses ever entered into the picture. God promised Abraham, you will have this area that he's leading Moses on to get to. And Moses never even gets to get there. And maybe today, even before we get started, maybe God is leading you on a journey. And you have no clue where God is going you. Maybe it's been 40 years of struggling with alcoholism or addiction or whatever else may be going on, but God is leading you on a journey. Each and every one of us are on a journey, and we don't know where we are going. We know the author who is leading us. Whether it's on dry land or whether it's over the mountains or whatever may be going on, God is leading each and every one of us on a journey. And he gets to this place as Moses is trying to take over the area of Canaan. He gets here. And God starts to explain to Moses how to build his tabernacle, his place of worship. And God sets out specific details of what to do. It should be a cubit high and 5 cubits wide, He lays out very, very specific details for the nation of Israel and how to build this. And there are some amazing online resources. If you're curious about the tabernacle, there are amazing online resources to go and find. And you can literally take virtual tours where people have recreated this stuff through animation and through drawings. And you can see this almost firsthand from the description that God gives that is so specific here in this story. And from Exodus to Leviticus all the way through, he outlines things like this. To give you a few facts about the tabernacle and just to kind of hit on some things before we jump into the main part. There are people who estimate that there were this estimate is really a low amount, that there was over 1,200 pounds of gold used to build the tabernacle. Now that is a ton of gold, literally and figuratively, that is a ton of gold. All right, these people, the Israelites, brought their gold. Now, part of this is a symbol because they use their gold to make Baal idols and they use their gold to build other idols. And part of it is because gold represents wealth. And they bring their wealth, they bring their things to make this tabernacle for God. Everything in the tabernacle is gold plated or bronze or silver or fine linens or something that is going on. That's estimated, low estimations of a ton of gold used. There are thousands of pounds of linen, of acacia wood, which is like the highest wood that you could get at that time. There's thousands of pounds of that stuff. We're going to have a picture of a tabernacle here in a second. Literally every minute detail was laid out for the Israelites on how to build this stuff. They had to sacrifice financially and they had to sacrifice spiritually to get themselves in the right place to enter into the tabernacle. Here's a picture of the tabernacle up here. And again, this is online. You can find this stuff. This is easy. Right there in the center where you see the little man kind of petting the sheep, right there in the center is called the bronze altar. And that's where they would come and they would burn all the sacrifices for God. These tables, that's where they would sacrifice the animals. They would kill Bambi or whatever else was running around that they could kill. And they would kill these animals for sacrifices to God. And then they would burn it on the bronze altar. And they said that the fires never were quenched in Israel. I don't know about you, but I know about myself. And my own sins could fill up that altar tenfold. And could fill up the burning of offerings that I would have to pay for God. And that's just me, not counting the rest of the nation of Israel that would be going on. And I'm sure that they're probably as sinful as I am. The bronze altar's right there, right next to it as you're going toward that tent, is the bronze laver, or however you would like to pronounce it. It's where the priests would go right after they sacrificed this animal. They would go and they would wash their hands clean for the next offering. So you can imagine this water, after they have killed this animal, they have cut it up just specifically the way that God outlines it, and they go and they wash their hands clean, similar to how Christ washes us clean when we accept Him and come into a saving knowledge of Him. And then as you go in, there's this veil where the gold columns are. There's this veil that separates. The rest of the nation of Israel could go wherever they wanted to outside in this area. But only the priests could go into the ark or the tabernacle for God. Only they could enter into the presence of God. That veil separated the nation of Israel and the rest of the world from the presence of God. God was with them, but that veil separated them. And just like maybe some of you today or maybe somebody that you know, we are separated from God without Christ. We are separated eternally from Christ without a saving knowledge of who He is. The next picture should be a side shot of the tabernacle. I'm sorry, I didn't put that one in there. That's okay. Go back to the first one. All right, this one, inside, once you come through this veil, you enter into the holy place. And you have a couple of things there which we just read about, which I'm going to kind of talk about today. You have the bread of presence, the table that it sits on. You have the lampstand over here on your left-hand side that lights up the holy place. You have the altar of incense directly in front of you that has fragrant offerings that they send to God. And then as soon as you get to that, there's the ultimate veil that separates the priests. The priests could enter into this daily to change out the oil and to change out the incense, but they could only enter literally into the Ark of the Covenant where God is. And if you remember, the Ark represented the presence and the power of God. It held the Ten Commandments. They could only enter into that once a year. They could only communicate with God directly once a year. I'm going to tell you something, church. I can communicate with God right now through prayer, through worship. You don't need to have to go to church to worship. You don't have to go to the tabernacle to worship. We have the ability and the power to be able to do this each and every day. The next picture is what Chris showed just a second ago. This is the bread of presence table, which we just read from 23 until 30 in Exodus. That's what we just read about, is them overlaying that. It's a beautiful, beautiful table. If you can count there, or maybe you can't see it, there are 12 loaves on this table. 12 loaves of bread. The Israelites had to supply a ton of flour to be able to make these bread loaves each and every week. The 12 loaves represent the 12 tribes of Israel. If you're taking notes, maybe you want to stick that in there. These 12 loaves represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And that was a symbol that God was with each and every tribe and each and every family. Even though they could not enter into the presence of God, God was still with them and leading them. Even when the nation of Israel was turning away from God, God was still with them and leading them each and every step of the way. Maybe as we were reading this, you were confused about the bread of presence. Maybe if you still use the King James Version, or if there's another translation. A lot of these translations read shewbread or showbread. And it literally means the bread of faces, the bread of faces of God. And there's been a ton of studies of people doing about how each bread loaf not only represents the 12 tribes of Israel, but represents a different communicatable attribute of God. And how this bread of presence, literally they would have it there for a full week. They would make this bread, it would sit right there for a week. They would have salt that they would sprinkle on top of it to preserve this bread. And you'd have the incense that would be mixing with it, the smell, and all these things. And after the week of sitting there in the hot sun under this tent, the priests who would go and enter into this place would eat these 12 loaves. And that's how they would get rid of the loaves, is that they would eat them. And then they would replace them each and every single week. And that's on your right. As soon as you walk into the holy place, boom, bread of presence is right there. On your left, you have the lampstand, which is the next thing there, the lampstand. And many of you may recognize this as a menorah that the Jewish people use for their, not their Christmas, but around Christmas time is when they celebrate this. You may recognize that as menorah, and that comes from this right here that we just read from 31 through the end of the chapter. And the lampstand represents a beautiful, beautiful picture. You've got the bread of presence here, and it says it right here in verse 37, and the lamp shall be the only light in the space in front of them. The lamp was literally the entire, the singular light that was in the entire inside of the tabernacle. The tabernacle had 4 layers of veils over the top of it. 4 different things that covered and cut out all light. And this lampstand was the only single light that was in this place. It burned pure olive oil. They had to change it out each and every day. And if you're taking notes, maybe you want to stick this down too. The lampstand symbolizes that the nation of Israel was supposed to be the light to the rest of the world, to show the rest of the world who God is. And it says it plainly in Isaiah 42:6, where it says, I am the Lord, I have called you in my righteousness, I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations. This lampstand was the only light that showed the presence of God, the faces of God for the nation of Israel. And this lamp was to light up God's presence to show the rest of the world. So that when the priests consumed the bread and they were filled spiritually, when they were filled physically, they could go out and tell the rest of the nation of Israel how to take God's love and light to the rest of the world. And then, as soon as you got done on the left-hand side, you looked straight ahead, and you saw the altar of incense. And this is another picture of the altar of incense right there. Incense was a beautiful, fragrant smell that they would always use. And incense in the Old Testament, if you do like a word study on incense in the Old Testament, incense is always used to symbolize prayer. Incense is always used to symbolize prayer. And David in Psalms talked about 100 times about how he would light incense so that God would hear his prayer. Incense was used when people were feeling terrible about the things that they would do. They would light this incense and they would pray that God would smell their fragrant offering to the Lord. So, as we see these three things that are in the holy place in the tabernacle, there are a lot of comparisons, which is again what I want to show us today, the comparisons between the holy place and how Christ fulfilled these things. So, number one, the lampstand. The lampstand, again, only place, the only source of light in the holy place. When Jesus comes to earth, it says it very, very plainly in John chapter 1, verses 4 through 9. And it says how Jesus is light. You got John chapter 1? All right. It says, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men." The light shines in the darkness. Again, the tabernacle, zero light comes in. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I'm going to tell you something today, church. It doesn't matter what you're going through. Again, addictions, valleys, mountains, whatever. There is not a place you can go that is not so dark that the light of God does not shine into it. There is not a place that you can go, that you can run, that you can outstretch God's love and God's protection over your life. So whatever you're going through today, God is here for you. He is leading you on a journey just like He was the Israelites. And He is leading you through the mountains. And He is leading you through everything that you have that is going on here. The second thing that we can see from the lampstand and the lampstand in the holy place is that the lampstand had one specific purpose in that holy place. The lampstand shone, or shone, whatever, however the English pronunciation is. That's a weird verb. All right. The lamp showed the light on the bread of presence. The lamp's purpose was to shine light in the holy place for the nation of Israel. For them to show it to the rest of the world. So let me ask you something today, church. Where is your lampstand at? What is your light shining on? Because I think, and this has been placed on my heart probably for 6 months, is that I think in America as a church today, we have taken the lampstand away from the presence of God, and we have put it on ourselves, we have put it on sports, we have put it on technology, we have put it on Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat, and we have put it on everything else except for on the actual face of God that the bread of presence represents. We have made idols out of sports and Go Alabama and War Eagle and Trojans and all that stuff is fantastic. But I think that we have put that in the place of where God should be. And I think that we have made an idol of things that we should never have replaced with. We have become just like the nation of Israel and made Baals and made worship out of something that does not deserve the glory of an almighty God. So I don't know about you, but I've struggled with this in my own life about putting work first in my life ahead of God, or putting work ahead of my wife, or putting work ahead of whatever, or putting sports, and I can rah-rah, cheer, whatever, but I forget that I can do that same thing on Sunday whenever I come into God's presence. So what is your light shining on? The second thing, the bread. The bread symbolizes Christ and how Christ is the bread of life. In John chapter 6, verse 35, it says, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Now, as we read this today, we say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. to the nation of Israel as they're reading this, as Jesus is preaching to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all of Jerusalem. They literally understood that to be the bread of life. The bread of life that's in the holy place, the Passover bread that they eat all the time. He is the bread of life. That is the representation there. And the second thing that we can learn from the bread of presence is that we are called to feed others. The bread of presence isn't meant for me. It's meant for me to eat, to pour out to somebody else. And this is a wonderful picture of Missions Month and exactly what Daniel and Blake and Mickey and everybody in that video and all the videos that we've done so far have talked about. The gospel is the life for the world that we have to go and share to people. There is nothing else that is going to matter in this world. It doesn't matter how much money I made, how much retirement or 401k I have. Eternity matters. I can't fathom eternity with an almighty God or an eternity in hell separated from God. But both are extremely real, and both should push us to share the love of Christ with the rest of the world. But I also think there's a third thing here that's in the bread that sometimes we miss. And the third thing is that sometimes I think that we starve ourselves from the presence of God. I do think that we starve ourselves from the presence of God. I mentioned that earlier, where we have taken idols and placed that on something else rather than placing it on God. And I think that these verses in Psalms highlights beautifully what David means and what I think our prayer should be today. It says in Psalm 105:4, "Seek the Lord in His strength. Seek His presence continually." Again, I don't have to come to church to see God. I don't have to enter into the holy place once a week or enter the Holy of Holies once a year. I can seek God's presence continually in the small things. David says over and over in Psalms, "You have made yourself known through the heavens, through earth, through trees, through leaves, through everything around us." We can seek His presence continually. And finally in Psalm 102, it says, "Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into His presence with singing." Rick has said this over and over again, and I just want to echo it in today. The people of the church should constantly be a people of praise and a people of joy and a people that don't get caught up in all the stuff that's going on in the world. We are of the world, but we are not of the world. I was telling Amy this morning. Whenever I was scrolling through Facebook and Instagram first thing this morning, I saw there's a growing culture in this country where we only have two sides to an argument. It's either black or white. It's either right or wrong. It's either I'm a Republican or I'm Democrat. There is no middle ground in this country. And all we are doing is leading to a culture that says extreme right and extreme left. And somebody standing over here in the middle ground is becoming non-existent. On my news feed this morning, literally all I saw was Colin Kaepernick is a hero and Colin Kaepernick is the scum of the earth, where he didn't stand up for the national anthem in a game, if you didn't know. That's what's going on. Or I saw on my Facebook feed this morning that this little black kid that was shot is completely right because he should have been shot, or this black kid is completely wrong because he should have never been accused or done anything. That's literally all I ever see. I never see a solid person standing in the middle saying, you know what, both parties were wrong. And both parties need to look at Christ. And both parties need to do X, Y, and Z. I'm not saying anything about these issues, but what I am saying is that we as a country, we as a church, and we as a person have drifted away from seeing who God is, letting our light shine on Him, and have instead turned things about us and have become selfish and have made things a black and white issue or a right and wrong issue rather than seeking the truth of Christ first, ahead of all things, and walking that line. The third thing that we see that I want us to talk about this morning is in the incense. And we see in Ephesians 5, 1 and 2, that Jesus is the ultimate fragrant offering. Again, that means that prayer, and that the incense signified prayer, and Ephesians 5, 1 through 2 says, "Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ has loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." Jesus is the ultimate fragrant offering. I don't have to go through someone to pray. I don't have to pray to Mary. I don't have to pray to whoever. I can talk to God directly, and God hears our prayers. And so again, if you are going through something this morning, God is leading you on that journey. God is providing and sustaining you through that journey, and God hears you no matter what. God hears our prayers, and God loves us despite of everything that we have done, and despite of all that I will continue to do. And so I just want to do something different this morning, probably than what we normally do. And maybe it's the same thing that we always do, but it's a different meaning this morning. As Jonathan and Tim come to play our closing hymn, I just want to open the altar for prayer. I know there are families here that are struggling with things going on in their lives. I know there are individuals here that are struggling. Maybe you don't even realize that you are struggling. You're just so good at hiding behind in the darkness. You're so good at hiding behind a mask of I come to church on Sundays, or whatever the case may be. But I just want to open up the altar for prayer. If you need something to be prayed about, our prayer rooms are right over here. If you are going through something, you just need to confess that to God, or you need to rededicate, and you say, you know what, I've been taking this lampstand that's right over here, should have been shining on God's presence the entire time, and all I've done is made a God out of sports, I made a God out of school, I made a God out of work, whatever the case may be. I just want to open up this altar this morning. God hears our prayers. We don't need the incense. He's right here with us today. So if you will, come as we sing, and there will be plenty of people here to pray for you.